Hi, everyone. I am Kelly. This is Unsung History Live, the first Unsung History Live, mostly because I don't know what to do with myself when I'm not working or podcasting. So the wonderful Vaughn Joy has agreed to talk with me today, join me for this live show. So thanks, Vaughn.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And your first live show. That's really exciting.
It's very
Yeah.
exciting. So we today are going to appropriately, since it is Christmas Eve, we are going to talk Christmas movies. And Vaughn, so you are a PhD researcher on Christmas films? You're getting your PhD in Christmas
Yeah.
films?
Yeah, I really am. And it sounds absolutely bizarre. And most people are kind of like, what do you make good decisions? But I think I do. And that's very much shorthand for what the actual thesis is about. So what I'm doing with my thesis is looking at like quote unquote innocent media and things that we think of as non-political. And Christmas films have, for a very long time, been the non-political, kind of non-controversial film subcategory.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing is saying that no, that's not true, because I don't believe that any art or media can be non-political, especially films that are so kind of integral to our idea of what it is to be an American, and films that have such kind of resonance with American history. So I chose Christmas films as kind of my case study to explore non-political media, and what it can actually tell us about certain time periods. And I also kind of argue that non-political media is actually more political than straightforwardly political things, because if you like go into see like JFK or Saving Private Ryan or any of these other films, you kind of have an idea of where it's going politically. And if you are hard against the politics that you know are going to be in the film, you probably won't see it. So those films are more reaffirming for the followers of particular politics, whereas with films such as It's a Wonderful Life or Miracle on 34th Street, which we'll be talking more about today, you don't go into it thinking you're going to take away a political or cultural message. So it actually is more successful at putting across a specific message.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that's what I argue in my thesis. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at Christmas films in the early Cold War period and the immediate post-war, so 1946 to 1961, and how these really kind of set the tone for Christmas films through the rest of the 20th century into the 21st, and also how they reflect some very important things in the cultural and political moments of the post-war period and early Cold War.
And so you are studying American films, Hollywood films, but you're studying in London. Is there
Yes.
a difference in the way, it does that look different in films in England, in Europe, in various different places?
That's a great question. So I, again, think that all art has a political leaning, especially if it is presenting someone who is a like typical American or British person. I think I don't know what's going on with my camera. Sorry about that. I don't know why
We can
that's
still
happening.
hear you okay, so it's all right.
Cool.
Someone
So
is trying to censor our discussion.
well, we'll talk about that. We will get to that. But a film that is alleging to present kind of an average person of a particular identity is inherently political in putting across what an average American or British person or Russian person or whatever looks like in a film. So they're building an archetype of a national identity. So I think that every kind of country with its own cinematic community and industry will have similar kind of structural resonances to what I'm doing with Hollywood films. I can't speak as much to other kind of countries and their cinematic industries, as I said, but I definitely hold the kind of belief that my thesis can kind of transcend with a bit of reworking for each country that it is set in.
Yeah. Of course, the other countries wouldn't have Senator McCarthy. So,
no, they
I mean,
wouldn't.
they might have their own version, but they wouldn't have McCarthy specifically. So that would change the culture a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, old Joe is very much ours. He's very much an American.
Yes.
But it's very interesting studying it over here because it's really challenged me and a lot of my American kind of perceptions. I was born and raised in Philadelphia and stayed there until I was 22. And when I moved abroad for grad school, I started really confronting things that I didn't know needed confronting about my American identity and my kind of patriotism, things of the like. So actually studying American history here is very sorry about that. I really don't know what's happening to my camera right now. What was I saying? So studying American films over here is really fascinating, and especially with my supervisor, he's absolutely brilliant. He's written so many great books on American history on film. His name is Melvin Stokes. Little shout out for him. And he is a British person who did his Ph.D. at Princeton. So we have this kind of dual perspective, both of us, but flipped, where he has ingrained British ideas and I have ingrained American ideas, and we can really challenge each other on it. And it's a really great kind of working relationship to engage with these inherent ideas about kind of Americana that I'm looking at.
So we're going to talk about It's a Wonderful Life and Miracle on 34th Street. Do you have a preference which one we start with?
No, not really. Which one do you like more?
I like Miracle on 34th Street a lot.
Let's do Miracle then.
All right. So, and I'll admit, this is the one I've seen far more often because it is one of my dad's favorite movies. And so I've seen it probably many times, but it's been a long time. And I watched it just this morning with my children who loved it. And I think part of the reason I like it more than It's a Wonderful Life is the pacing. It's a very snappy movie. It's just over an hour and a half. It just, it's maybe just a teensy bit too quick. Like you don't really understand how I think their names are Doris and Fred actually get together. Like he's trying to get her, and then all of a sudden one day, like they're like, "Darling, love," and it's like, okay, I don't quite get that. But the rest of it, it's so quickly paced. Like there's nothing extra in the movie. There's no filler. It just sort of has the story, and so that is what I'm looking for as a moviegoer. And so I really appreciate the film.
Yeah, a couple things that you just said kind of jump out at me. One, I love that your kids loved it because it's a film from 1947, and it's difficult to get children to sit and watch a film from 1947 a lot of the time because it's just so different. The kind of formulas that were used to create films and even down to shot compositions now are more engaging to the eye, so children are more kind of accessible to today's films. And everything now is scored constantly. There's always music. So that's really interesting that they really enjoyed it, and I love that.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that when it came on, we actually watched a black and white version. And when it came on, they were like, "Black and white, we can't watch black and white." And at the end of the movie, I said to my 7-year-old, I was like, "See, aren't you glad you watched it even though it was black and white?" And he said, "Oh, I totally forgot it was black and white. I thought I was watching color." So like his brain filled in the colors.
I love that. That's really great. And black and white, I mean, there's no right or wrong way to watch a film, but I would recommend black and white for both of the films that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
I just think it has such a beautiful feel to it in black and white that there are other things you can get out of watching a film in color, for sure. But I don't know, the black and white almost makes it more timeless by pinning it in the time period that it is, which I find really fascinating. Another thing you said about Doris and Fred's relationship, they really do very quickly just flip on a dime from her saying, I want no part of this, to Fred going, oh, darling. And especially when you think about the time frame of the film, it starts on Thanksgiving Day and it ends on Christmas. And they foster this beautiful relationship where he is doing her dishes for her within a matter of weeks. It's really interesting, and also kind of a trope of the time period itself as well, to not really focus on the relationship building, just accept that now they're in a relationship because he called her darling.
Yeah.
So that is an interesting one.
Which is quite the opposite of what we'll see in It's a Wonderful Life when we talk about that and that relationship building that takes much, much longer.
Yes. Yeah. There's something I want to say about that, but I'll keep it. I'll tuck that away for in a little bit. So Miracle on 34th Street, if anyone hasn't seen it or doesn't know the plot of it, which many people probably do just by kind of living in society, I think.
And there's been a remake of it.
There's a remake that more people have probably seen with Richard Attenborough in 1994. But the original one has a slightly different ending from the 1994 version. It's about an elderly man who believes himself to be the real Santa Claus. And he goes by the name Kris Kringle. And he very much looks like Santa Claus. It's Edmund Gwenn, and he is kind of Santa. He is the quintessential Santa. And he runs into Doris at the Thanksgiving Day parade for Macys. She is in charge of the parade, and she has a very kind of high up job within the Macys department store, which is interesting for 1947 to have a career woman so high up in the department store. And the Santa Claus that they have is drunk at the Macys Thanksgiving Day parade. So Edmund Gwenn is in fits about this, and he's like, he can't represent me in this parade. So Doris is like, well, you look enough like Santa, you're hired. And that shifts into him being hired as the actual store Santa for Macys. And as he's working there, he starts to implement this new policy, which is really just him telling the truth. And when kids ask for certain toys, he's like, oh, you don't want that toy, or he says, like, if you want that toy, then your parents should go shop somewhere else because we don't have that toy, or it's cheaper somewhere else. And the stock manager is livid about this because he's like, the point of a department store Santa is to sell the excess stock, is to convince children what they want for Christmas and make good deals for their parents. So this goodwill policy of Santa Claus, again, this goodwill policy of Santa Claus is seen as kind of foolhardy and insane, and Doris fires him. And then R.H. Macy himself says, this is absolutely brilliant. Our profits are going up, even though we're turning customers to other stores because now they're more loyal to us since we told the truth. Yeah. And we were helping them out, so they're helping us out by buying more. And he rehires Kris Kringle and implements this goodwill policy that kind of proliferates into other chains of Macys, and then Gimbel's gets into it as Macys' rival. And it just spreads across the country, this spirit of goodwill and reframing your commercialist kind of stance on honesty and being helpful to the customer, and kind of a modern idea of putting the customer first.
Yeah, although still with the intent to sell stuff.
Yes,
and make a lot of money.
which is the most fascinating part of Miracle on 34th Street, is how brilliantly they do this, because you get the sense that this film is saying department stores are trying to kind of take advantage of customers, and we're saying that that's wrong and they should not do that, and we should all be honest and put goodwill first. But then at the exact same time, the film is saying, when you put them first, your profits go up, so really this is self-serving, and like customers don't matter as long as they're buying things.
Yeah.
And in the press book materials for it, the kind of promotional materials, there are kind of guides for how to promote this film for different individuals who are seeking that. And one of the promotional ideas is for department stores to implement their own goodwill policy and tie it in with the film. And it outlines exactly how you can profit off of Miracle on 34th Street by saying, we believe in Santa, and we believe that you should go shop at Gimbel's because they have the better price, or they still have the product you want in stock, so you should go there. So the film just this absolute brilliant, like, gymnastics of telling you we don't believe in kind of commercialist stances and everything, as a commercialist stance itself. It's insane. It's absolutely brilliant.
And Macey even explicitly says that at one point. He's like, they'll love us and then they'll shop more here and we'll make money.
He specifically says, we'll be the store with a heart. Yeah. And that's a ploy to get more customers. Yeah. It's really so well done in a kind of evil way, but in this like joyful film where you just love it. And then there's a kind of concurrent plot running with the Goodwill Policy that people think that he is insane for this. And the store psychologist sends him to a mental institution for striking him on the head and calls him manic and all of this, which is it's not a great scene. So he sends him to an institution, and then there's a trial about whether this man is actually Santa Claus. And ultimately, they use the U.S. Postal Service, spoilers, they use the U.S. Postal Service to prove that he is Santa Claus, because some postmen have this whole room full of letters to Santa, and they had read about the trial in the paper, and they were like, oh, well, if he's at the court, let's just dump all of these letters at this guy if he's claiming to be Santa. But legally, if the federal government is delivering mail to someone, then that is their identity according to the law. So he gets off with being Santa Claus, essentially. Yeah. It's really brilliant. It's such a good film, and just idea for a film.
Yeah, because it's such a good like Christmas movie, but it's also such a good courtroom drama. The courtroom scenes are amazing.
And the politics behind the courtroom scenes, they're very quick, but the judge like presiding over this, he doesn't know what to do, because he's like, of course I don't believe in Santa, I'm an adult. And his electoral advisor says, if you rule that there is no Santa Claus and that Santa doesn't exist, you will not be the judge in a year. Like, you will lose all of the votes, because anyone with children will not vote for you.
And and the toy makers and department stores, and like he also ties it to this like commercialism.
Yeah, exactly. And his own children are very cold to him as he's presiding over this case, because they're like, you're really putting Santa on trial, Dad? And it's fantastic. Just and they're very quick. They're probably about 3 minutes total of the film is dedicated to this conversation about or several conversations about the kind of electability of the judge
Yeah.
based on him saying whether Santa's real or not. It's really great.
Yeah, it's pretty brilliant. And, you know, it was so surprising watching it now, thinking like they actually used the name Macy and
Yeah.
Gimple, like these real department stores. I mean, the actual Macy wasn't alive in 1947, so you know, it wasn't actually R.H. Macy, but you know, they used that name and they could do that. Like they can't do that now.
Well, so that's a very interesting thing too, because Macy's was all about this. They were like, "Oh, that's free advertising. Give it to us." And they actually kind of shopped around department stores to see like where are we going to put this.
Yeah.
And Macy's was the favorite for it. And as soon as they read the line "a store with a heart," they were like, "Yeah, check please, absolutely. You can film in our store in the flagship at 34th Street." All of the scenes in the store are the actual 34th Street flagship shop.
Wow.
And all of like the bustling crowds, they're real shoppers. They weren't extras or actors or anything. So you really get a sense of the actual energy of shopping at Christmas in the 1940s in the film. And yeah, Macy's snapped it up. But in 1994, with the remake, they approached Macy's and asked if they could do it. And Macy's was like, "We want nothing to do with this film," because Macy's was in kind of financial trouble at the time, and they did not want any publicity that wasn't their own kind of directive, especially with the kind of subplot of it that it is a commercialist thing, that they're only good to a point where they're profiting from it. So in the remake, I think it's a fictionalized store called Kohl's, I believe. So it's not like the Kohl's that still exists in the States, but they made a new department store for it. And I think that kind of suffers. I think the remake suffers a bit because it's not Macy's.
Yeah.
Because Macy's itself is a character in the 47 version. Yeah. And I don't think the cultural resonance is there for a fictionalized department store in 94.
Yeah. So we're going to move on in a second to our other film, but I want to say the sort of other thing that I think is so brilliant about this film is the ambiguity. You know, you can believe walking out of this that he really is Santa, or that he really is just this kindly old man who thinks he's Santa. And it's up to you, the viewer, to just sort of walk away with however you want to view it. So that's part of what makes it okay to show kids, right? Because my kids were sitting there like, "Yeah, he's really Santa."
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think it's even more interesting with this commercialist aspect, because the kind of miracle that happens at the end of the film that gets Susan is Doris's daughter, gets her to really believe that he is Santa Claus, and Doris to really believe, is that Susan had asked him for a house so that Doris and Fred could take their relationship further and they could be a family together. And at the end, they are driving past this house that Kris Kringle sent them on a detour to go this way. And Susan jumps out of the car and she's like, "This is it. This is the house. This is exactly what I wanted." And his cane and hat are kind of in the corner. And they're like, "Is he real?" But the interesting thing is that he didn't give them the house. He just sent them to the house. They still have to buy the house. So it's not really a gift for them. And I think that really ties in with the how they structure Santa Claus in this film, that through the first 40 or so minutes, you really believe that he is Kris Kringle, he is Santa Claus. There's the very first scene, actually, he's walking past a window display and he sees a shopkeeper setting up the reindeer, and he tells him like, "Oh, Comet is on my left, and like Blitzen would never be next to Vixen or something," and he's giving notes on this, and the shopkeeper thinks that he's insane, and you're like, "I don't really know what to believe." And a bit later on, there's a scene with a young Dutch girl who is newly immigrated to the U.S. and she doesn't speak English. And she sits on Santa's lap, and her mom is apologizing and saying that she doesn't speak English. I'm so sorry. You can just kind of brush her off a bit. But Kris Kringle just slips into perfect Dutch and speaks to her and figures out what she wants for Christmas. And it's a very sweet, kind of beautiful moment. So you think there is kind of this Christmas magic with him. And that's at the time, like right before Macys fires him.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the next scene, they rehire him, but on their own terms and on their grounds of, we're going to use you for commercialism because you weren't working for us commercially. You were this kind of mythic, traditional, magical Santa Claus. And that magic is gone by the end of the film because he's not actually making miracles. He's just putting people in the direction of where they can buy stuff. And he says at one point, a mom asks him kind of how he knows that Gimbel's has the better price or that they still have stock or something. And he has a very quick kind of one-liner of, I keep a very close eye on the toy market. But that line is so interesting because Santa makes the toys. Santa has a workshop. Well, he doesn't. He has elves that make the toys. Yeah. And then he delivers them. But the commercialist Santa that they rehire, he doesn't make toys. He just watches the markets and points you in the directions that you can go buy them. And it's just so brilliant and kind of answers a question better than any other Christmas film of like, how do adults not believe in Santa if toys are happening? Like if presents show up on Christmas morning and the parents didn't buy them, where did they come from and why don't the parents believe in Santa? And this film really does away with that problem by not having the traditional Santa anymore. He doesn't deliver gifts. He doesn't have reindeer in this film, even though he mentions them. He's specifically just a walking advertisement for the toys. It's so well done. It really, really is.
Yeah. You know, when I was a kid, at some point I discovered wrapped presents, like under my parents' bed or something. And I had this whole thing in my mind that like my parents bought the presents and wrapped them, but then Santa came on Christmas night to get them and put them under the tree. And like so badly wanted to believe that I was like constructing scenarios where it could all be true. And you know, this movie, it can all be true.
Yeah. I definitely remember staying up late at night trying to catch Santa Claus when I was a kid, and I would like fall asleep in the living room, and I remember like waking up with my dad like carrying me to bed and being like, get out of the living room, like we have to do the thing. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about It's a Wonderful Life, which is a much different kind of movie, a much in some ways darker movie, and is not really a Christmas movie. There's like Christmas at the end, and I know it's sort of thought of as a Christmas movie, but Christmas is such a tiny little part of this overall movie.
It is, but I would argue, I do argue that it's a Christmas film as much as A Christmas Carol is a Christmas novel, because It's a Wonderful Life is an American reimagining of Dickens. Yeah. And the only kind of Christmassy elements truly to A Christmas Carol are the fact that it happens on Christmas Eve night. And he wakes up and says, what day is it? And, like there are themes and like emotions associated with Christmas that very much come out of Dickens, with love and generosity and philanthropy and all of those sorts of things that are really echoed in It's a Wonderful Life. And I think that's what makes it a Christmas film more than just the last 35, 40 minutes happening on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you. The first hour and 20 minutes,
it's a long movie.
It is a long movie. It's I think it's 2 hours 10 minutes total. But the first hour and 20 are just building George's life story. So if you haven't seen It's a Wonderful Life, which again, American culture, you know it if you haven't seen it anyway. But it's about George Bailey, who is played by Jimmy Stewart, and he is it's watching his life up to 1945, from when he was 9 years old in 1919. And it goes through the Depression and runs on banks and has all like World War II imagery and everything, so you can really get a sense of the time periods that are happening in George's life. But it's just a series of him giving up things that he wanted to do. He wanted to travel, he wanted to go to college, he wanted to never get married or settle down. He wanted all sorts of things, and the one thing he specifically didn't want was to stay in the small town where he grew up in Bedford Falls. But he does stay there because his dad passes away when he's about 22 years old, 21, 22. And he stays in the town to take on his dad and uncle's Bailey Brothers Building and Loan. And the Building and Loan is a kind of banking company that gives out loans for people to build houses. Mm-hmm. And George feels that this is a deeply important thing for the town to keep them from falling into the villain's hands, who is Mr. Potter, played by Lionel Barrymore, and his kind of slums. So Mr. Potter throughout the film is buying up all of the other industries in town very slowly, and they do very well, just quick mentions of him calling a politician and saying like, you need to do something for me, or like calling up the police chief, or calling up the media for certain things. And he buys all of the banks during the Great Depression, except for the Building and Loan. So by 1945, when the kind of climax of the film happens, George is exhausted and has been fighting Mr. Potter his entire adult life. Even as a child, there's a scene of him fighting Mr. Potter. And you really get the sense that he is the final bulwark against kind of big institution and financial powers that are monopolizing and trying to exploit the people living in the town. So in very kind of Frank Capra and George and Jimmy Stewart fashion, he's this populist hero and fighting for the common man and the underdog in an American town. And he ultimately, his uncle misplaces $8,000, which will ruin the Building and Loan with scandal and claims of kind of embezzlement and all sorts of things. So George takes it upon himself to contemplate taking his own life to secure his life insurance policy that would cover the debt and then some, and really keep the Building and Loan going so that the town can have this option in opposition to Mr. Potter's monopoly. And his guardian angel comes down and saves him from that moment. And then George wishes that he had never been born. And Clarence, the angel, played by Henry Hurst, he shows him what the world would have been like if he were never there. And it's abysmal. And Potter owns everything. And it's urbanized.
It's the world we actually live in, right?
It's the world we live in. It's the Back to the Future 3 kind of horrible future. That's what it is. And George sees all of this and he's really torn up about it. He's very upset. And then ultimately he sees that his wife, Donna Reed, is a librarian and she has glasses and her hair's up. And he's like, this can't happen.
He's like, Dad, she's all dowdy and this is the worst possible future.
She reads books now. Like he's that's what sends him over the edge, is that his wife doesn't look as hot as she used to. Yeah. But he misses his wife and his kids and they don't exist in this timeline. So he begs for his life back and Mary, his wife, she saves the day and brings the whole town around to get him out of this financial situation. And the film ends with this like joyous rendition of Auld Lang Syne with all of the characters in George's living room.
Yeah, she basically sets up like a GoFundMe.
Yeah, she does. A 1945 GoFundMe. It's one of my favorite films of all time, not even just Christmas films. I absolutely adore it. I think it's just fantastic. Yeah, it's so good. I'm a huge Capra fan though, and Jimmy Stewart, and I understand that other people are not those things.
I have like a love-hate relationship with Jimmy Stewart. We just watched Vertigo recently, and he just plays creepy so well.
He does. He really does.
And so it's hard not to like at certain points in this be like, I don't know, he's a little bit creepy. Like he's like the guy next door, you know, like you're supposed to like love, and then it's like there's just this tinge of like, I don't know, especially when he sort of has the crisis moment where they've lost the $8,000 and he's lashing out at everybody. He's lashing out at his family. He's lashing out at his poor teacher on the phone. Like, you know, it's easy to sort of see how he can slip into the sort of dark side quickly. I mean, you know, it's tensions building up over his whole life. So, you know, you sort of get where it comes from, but it's just an interesting moment there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think he's one of my favorite actors, and partly because he looks very much like my great grandfather, and I I definitely associate the two, and I'm like, oh, it's Pop. But largely because I think just his emotional scale and his range as an actor, I think is really impressive. He seems very docile for most of the film, so it really erupts in that moment. There are a couple moments when he's squaring off with Potter throughout the film, but then that scene of him blowing up at his children and his wife, and he throws stuff off a table and gets physically kind of involved with the anger. I just is such a counterbalance to how almost passive he's been in the rest of the film, and I think it just works really well. And I also think he displays desperation brilliantly. Jimmy Stewart was the first, I don't know how to phrase this, first visually a man to human man to cry on screen. And I'm saying that because the Tin Man and the Scarecrow cry in Wizard of Oz, but they're so heavily made up that they're displaced from kind of presenting as an American man. So it's so steeped in fantasy, all of that this is the first time we actually see like an average man cry on screen. And it just, to me, it feels so right that it was Jimmy Stewart who did that. Yeah, he really has a brilliant range, in my opinion.
Yeah. So tell me about the FBI and the relationship between the FBI and It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah. So as I said, It's a Wonderful Life is about two different bankers, but kind of representing different sides of banking, where one is this institutionalized power. And sorry, forgive me one moment.
Sure.
Had to turn on my power strip for my charger. So you have two bankers kind of pitting against each other and fighting this whole film long. And ultimately, like at the very end, there's this kind of collectivist thing, this GoFundMe, as you said, where the whole town comes around with money and bails him out of this financial trouble. So the FBI in 1947, they issued an internal memo on August 7th, 1947, that identified 8 films as potentially communist subversion. And It's a Wonderful Life was the second one. And their claims were based on this pamphlet written by Ayn Rand, of all people. Ayn Rand wrote 13 points of don'ts, things to not do in films for producers and writers and directors to keep your film from being communist subversion. It was called Screen Guide for Americans. It was released in 1947 and circulated around Hollywood. And some of the points were like, don't glamorize the common man, and don't smear American institutions. Don't smear the banks or political institutions specifically. Don't present collectivism as a good thing. So they were these very interesting kind of points that really can be taken so many ways, honestly, because how can you say what a film definitively is? As you were saying with Miracle on 34th Street, it's vague and it's ambiguous, and that's what art is, because art relies on the viewer interpreting it and resonating with it and having a reaction to it. There are absolutely intentions that an artist can put into their work, but no one can say what it definitively is or is not, in terms of its philosophy and messaging and all of those sorts of things. So the FBI uses Ayn Rand's pamphlet to mark these films as communist subversion, and with It's a Wonderful Life, they call it decidedly socialist in nature. They say that the film deliberately maligns the upper class. There are a lot of gems in it. They say that Mr. Potter was specifically made to be a Scrooge type so that people would hate him. And I mean, he was. It's an American reimagining of Dickens. It's this Capricorn twist on Dickens by spinning the narrative, and instead of focusing on Scrooge and having divine intervention show him his weaknesses, it focuses on Bob Cratchit and gives him divine intervention to show him his strengths, which I think is a deeply American thing to empower an individual. And then beyond that, it's about two bankers. It's capitalist in so many ways. I find it so interesting that the FBI, decidedly socialist in nature, is a very interesting claim, I think, for Capra and his films, and specifically It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
I can kind of see it, but I don't know. I've been thinking about this one for about 3 years since I found this FBI file, which was a whole story in itself. That you said earlier, like somebody's listening and trying to stop our conversation. I had an issue with the FBI because of this FBI file where they told me it didn't exist, and I was looking at it and I was like, I don't know about that. Which is a badge of honor that the FBI is aware of my work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that's so sort of, I see maybe where they're coming from. I don't know. It's so interesting that the film chooses not to have any redemption arc for Potter. Like, I know that he's not the focus, but I kind of half expected him to walk in at the end of the movie and be like, here's your $8,000 that you dropped on me by accident. There is no redemption arc. He is just evil.
There's no redemption arc, but there's also no punishment. He has zero repercussions in the film. He stole that $8,000 and then tried to frame George, knowing that it wasn't George who lost it. Like, he called the police chief and said, you need to issue a warrant for George's arrest because of embezzlement and scandal and all sorts of things. But he actually committed the crime. He committed a genuine crime, and no one else did. But Potter still gets off because he's the wealthy one, and he owns the politicians and the police and the media. And I think that saves it from being socialist at all. The fact that there are no repercussions for Potter, that he gets away with everything, and there's no real kind of conclusion to the fight that they've been having for all of George's life. So we don't get a sense of what the day after Christmas looks like for Bedford Falls. The building and loan has a significant amount of money now, allegedly because Sam, his friend in London, he wires to say, I've informed my offices to advance you up to $25,000. But it's as a loan. It's not just have $25,000 for the building and loan. It's a loan. So he has to pay that back eventually. And the building and loan does not make money because they're almost a nonprofit for the town. So where does the story go after It's a Wonderful Life? I think that inherently, like, socialism would be changing policy and having repercussions for people exploiting other people financially. And it would be politicians not being owned by the millionaire. But the FBI says, like, no, this is New Deal era socialism. And that's really interesting because this memo and the Screen Guide for Americans kind of scared Hollywood a lot into allowing the House Committee on Un-American Activities, HUAC, as it's commonly known, into Hollywood in the summer of 1947. And by September, HUAC issued 11 subpoenas for potentially communist individuals within Hollywood. And they were very big names like Dalton Trumbo and Bertolt Brecht, that they were bringing to Congress to say, I am not a communist. And Congress knew what they were doing here. They were either going to get these like glamorous names that everybody knows to denounce communism, or they were going to get them to praise communism. Or kind of refuse to answer, and in that spin it as praise for communism, which is what they did. And using those kind of glamorous names really pushed the narrative for a lot of Americans who were like, why do I care about communism? Like, why is this an issue for me? Making it an issue of Hollywood and saying, like, your children are watching these films and they're going to grow up to be communists. That brought it home for a lot of people and really aided the McCarthyism movement that started a couple years later and lasted until 1954. So by kind of targeting these high names and saying, oh, Frank Capra, he's a socialist, it really furthered the Republican agenda. And especially because in 1946, the Republicans won back the House. So they spun they spun Congress to focus on these social issues so that people would turn against Democrats and the New Deal policies that were in place for the last 15 or so years, 10 to 15 years. And it eventually worked out because a Republican won in 48. So it was all very like this is how it all ties together. This Hollywood is integral to the political and cultural moment. And these films that we think aren't political, or that we're told aren't political, have very deep connections to the politics of the moment. And so much so as to be a part of flipping the House and flipping the White House and ushering in McCarthyism. Like, Hollywood is central to these very big moments in American history. And I find it fascinating. Really do.
Well, and then in the 2020 Republican convention, I forget who, but somebody said that Donald Trump was like George Bailey. It's like, what version of this movie did you watch? Because that is the wrong message to take away.
I never heard that.
Yeah. Somehow they saw
Wow.
him as Bailey and not Potter.
That is some mental Olympics.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's funny though when this idea that like your kids are watching this and they're going to become communists. Like, so my kids watched this movie with me last night, and they took the wrong message at the end, but like at the end of the movie, they're like, he's rich now. And like,
Ooh.
like my 7-year-old's walking around with a piece of paper, like, would you like a loan? Can I give you a loan? And here's the terms to pay back. And I was like, okay, wait, we need to keep talking about this. But don't think this movie is going to turn your kids into communists.
No, it's gonna turn them into capitalists. It argues a very specific kind of capitalism, this kind of smaller town, community run capitalism, but it is still capitalism. It is still loans. Like you don't just get a house, you have to apply for a loan and you have to pay back the loan. But it's more personal, and it's warmer hearted than this cold business mentality of Mr. Potter.
Yeah.
So ultimately, capitalism wins on both fronts, where George is now, he has more money to do this kind of smaller town, local economy, home building, all of that warm and kind, wonderful stuff. Potter still owns the rest of the town and the politicians and police and media, all of the other banks, and has no repercussions at all. So capitalism wins on every level in this film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my final thought on It's a Wonderful Life is that the hero of the story is Mary.
Yes, she is. She really is.
Like at several moments along the way. She's the one when there's like the run on the bank. She's like, here's our honeymoon money. Like just several times along the way. Like she's the one saving the day.
Yes, she really, really is. And I think that that's something that's missing a lot in commentaries on It's a Wonderful Life, is that she is so integral and also extremely active for a housewife in 1946. She purchases their house without telling George. And that's not something that would happen. Like, she surprises him with a whole house, and then she rebuilds the house herself.
Yeah.
While she's having all of these children and also running the USO during World War II. Like, she's a powerhouse, and she's brilliant, and she went to college and she worked in New York City, and like, her character is so well constructed, and she's strong. And ultimately, she's the one with the good ideas, where he thought my life insurance policy, and she thought, okay, like everyone in the town loves us and we love them, and we've all been helping each other the whole time. Yeah. I think that's something else that gets kind of lost in the film, is that we focus so much on George and how he's doing selfless acts and giving things up for other people, which he absolutely is. He sacrifices a lot for other people. But they also do things for him and for each other in town throughout the whole film. The first time we see George as an adult, he's picking up a suitcase to go traveling that the druggist in the town, whom he used to work for, he picked it out and paid for it as a gift for George to surprise him. So the very first thing we see is this town being generous and loving and caring about each other, and knowing that, oh, George wants to travel, I'm going to get him a suitcase. So that kind of emotional connection within the town has been there the entire time. And Mary just knows to tap into it when they're in financial trouble. And George, whether he's too proud to do so or whether he just doesn't think of it as an option, it really shows the kind of contrast between them. Yeah. She really is the hero. She's so great. Yeah. I really love Mary. I love Donna Reed. I think she's perfectly cast. I think the whole film is perfectly cast, actually. And with a lot of Capra's kind of veteran actors who are with him for a lot of his career, especially Thomas Mitchell and Samuel S. Hines and all of them. But yeah, the one thing about George and Mary's relationship that I did want to say that I thought of up top and said I'd keep. The scene in which they do decide to get married is kind of bizarre. Because, like a little bit. Sorry, one second. George is having a really bad night because his brother just got home from school and introduced them to his secret wife, which is a thing that happens. He got married when he was away and just brought home a wife. Yeah. And his wife has plans for him to go move to Buffalo to work in her dad's glass factory. And George knows that it's the right thing for his brother to do, so he sends him, like, he just knows that he's going to have to stay and run the building alone himself for however much longer and put off his dreams again. So he's in a very bad mood, and he goes to see Mary, and Mary has just gotten home from college, and she's very excited, and she wants to see him. She has all of these sweet little mementos from their first date, almost. And he's just miserable. She ends up smashing the record, and she gives up on all of her kind of hopes and dreams with George, seemingly. And then one of their friends calls and starts offering George a job, or an investment opportunity, rather.
In plastics.
In plastics, yes. And George is so frustrated that everyone else is moving on and doing such great things, and he is stuck here and can't do what he wants. And in that kind of anger, he realizes that he's been in love with Mary forever, and he kisses her really kind of ferociously.
Weirdly.
And weirdly, yes. And it's a tender, emotional moment, and then the next scene is they're getting married. But the reason it's so tender and emotional is because Jimmy Stewart was terrified of having to kiss Donna Reed. And the scene was supposed to play out very differently and calmly, and he wasn't supposed to be so kind of, I'm never getting married, and I don't want kids, and I don't want you, and everything he says in the scene. It wasn't supposed to be that way. But Jimmy Stewart tried to talk Frank Capra out of having this scene and rewriting it completely because he didn't want to have to kiss Mary. And he was terrified of this, having just come back from the war, and he hadn't had a stage kiss or a real kiss in so long, and he was nervous. And Frank Capra was like, listen, let's do one take, and if you're really uncomfortable, we will rework it, we will figure something out. So they do this take, and he's so overcome with emotion that all of Donna Reed's reactions in that are real. She's terrified because she's like, what is happening right now? And that's why it comes off as so weird, because he's so nervous and overcome with what's happening in the scene and what's happening in his head. And he just forces, like, kisses her. Yeah. And it is such an iconic kiss because it's so weird and uncomfortable almost. And you're like, wait, how did we get here? And why are they now married? And it's a bizarre scene, but I love that history attached to it, and like the off-camera context for it, that these are real people doing this scene that created such brilliant art that is still very iconic today. Yeah. It's really, really fascinating. 75 years since it came out on Monday, this past Monday. Wow. It's been 75 years since It's Wonderful Life was released, and it's still so, I mean, we're talking about it now. I've been talking about it all week and all month. I'm writing my PhD on it. It's so integral to kind of American history and Hollywood history in so many ways. Yeah.
Well, I think that is a great place to wrap this up. So, Vaughn, thank you so much for joining me. This was, I think I mentioned I was supposed to be traveling today, and, COVID. everything got confused and changed, but I am thrilled to have had the chance to talk with you about these movies and to have rewatched these movies. And so thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun. This is a really great thing to do on Christmas Eve night. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Merry Christmas, everyone. And if you haven't watched either or both of these movies, they are streaming. I believe, I forget what was on what. I think It's a Wonderful Life is on Amazon Prime, and Miracle on 34th Street I know is on HBO Max. I'm not sure if it's elsewhere as well.
I think it's also on Prime.
Okay. So yes, you should all go watch them. All right. Thanks, Vaughn.
Thank you.